So hello, so I'm very happy to be here to talk to you about optimal transport. So it's something I've been doing in the last 10 years as a researcher. And so I'm going to talk to you about OT and how to solve optimal transport in Python with the toolbox called POT for Python optimal transport. Okay, so what am I going to talk about? So I said I would do a quick introduction. I think it's always nice, to put the math here to explain what is the problem we try to solve with our toolbox. I'm going to talk a little bit about why optimal transport is interesting, both in terms of geometry and also how it can be used for machine learning and data science applications. So I basically stole a lot of nice pictures for papers, some of them being mine. And in the last part, I'm going to give you a little bit of code, so less code than Theo, but I'm going to show you how to basically call POT solvers to solve OT problem. Okay, so first, what is optimal transport? So optimal transport is a mathematical problem that's been asked first by Gaspard Monge in 1981. And so the question that Monge asked was, I want to move mass, so I want to move a pack of dirts, okay, from one position to another position, and I want to find the optimal way to move this dirt, okay? So when I take the mass here, where should I put it so that I minimize the total effort of moving the mass? It's a fascinating problem that was actually ill-posed by Monge. It was so hard to solve that nobody could solve it for many years, up to the 40s, when Kantorovich basically reformulated the problem in a way that now we can solve. For those who do numerical optimization, Kantorovich expressed that as a linear program, and so we do have solvers for linear program. And I'm going to show you what the problem is. So you want to move mass, okay? So here I have histograms, okay? So you want to move the red histogram onto the blue histogram. And so in order to minimize the effort, you need to define what's the effort. And the effort is a cost. So it's a cost matrix that tells you how much it costs to move from bin I to bin j. Okay, and so if you don't move, of course, the cost will be zero. So on the diagonal, you're going to have a zero. And the more you move far away, the more it's going to cost. So that's this matrix C here defines the geometry of the problem and tells you how much it costs. Then you want to find an optimal solution of this that's going to say, oh, the mass from this bin is going to go here. The mass from this bin is going to go here. And you're going to see that through the T matrix that's called the optimal transport matrix. And the T matrix, basically, if Tij is greater than 0, it means that you move mass from bin I to on the left to bin j on the right. Okay, that's it. And so you want to minimize the total cost. The total cost is just the sum, the double sum, of the product, but under the constraint that all the mass is moved. That is, all the mass from the left distribution is moved. So if you sum the column of T, you're going to recover the left distribution. And if you sum the column, the lines, the rows of T, you're going to recover the target distribution. So it's basically a linear program, so linear objective with linear constraints. It can be solved in n3 log of n, with n the number of bins. So I wouldn't say it scales extremely well, but you can still solve a few thousand, tens of thousand problems. Great. So there are two aspects in OT. So this OT matrix tells you where the mass goes. So it's interpretable. You can see, can go from here to here. And interestingly, you do not require to have histograms here. Okay, so this is another type of distribution where each point is an amount of mass, and you want to move this mass onto those points. So you can move from the red to the blue here. You're going to have a cost matrix that tells you how much it costs to go from one point to the other one. And by solving exactly the same problem, you're going to recover an OT matrix that's going to tell you how the mass is moved in the optimal way. And you can even visualize it, as you can see here, with black lines that say, oh, this point goes here, this point goes here. So not only is it a way to find correspondences between distribution, but it's going to give you the best correspondences. So the T encode basically this information and also tells you where the mass goes. So it also gives you some kind of movement. Another aspect is that when you find the optimal transport matrix, you can plug it in here. It's going to give you a cost. If the cost is 0, it means that you don't have to move. It's the same distribution. If the cost is greater than 0, it means that they are different, and then you do need to move. And the farther you are, the more you're going to move. This is called the Wasserstein distance. It's the distance associated to optimal transport. And it's a very important distance in machine learning for a very simple reason. I'm going to show you why here. Is that if I take the blue distribution here and I move it to the right, and I'm going to compute a bunch of distances here, okay? And so if it moves to the right, everything goes up, okay, because they are less and less similar, okay? But then after a while, look at what happens. All the classical distances, you know, the L2, the Euclidean, it goes up, and as soon as the support is not the same, it's a constant, okay? Whereas Wasserstein, that actually encode, you know, how far you are in the original space, will continue to increase. So if you want to minimize something, you really, really prefer to minimize the orange or the blue one, because you have a gradient, and that's the kind of thing we use a lot in deep learning, in machine learning, we want to minimize using gradients. So that's one reason why we love Wasserstein distance. It's well posed, and it's better to minimize. It also defines a geometry, because if a distance tells you the shortest path between two distributions, you can interpolate along this distribution, and I'm going to show you what it means. So interpolating between the two distributions uses barycenters. The definition is here. I won't enter into detail, but the idea is you can use it on the original L2 space, Euclidean space, or you can interpolate it in Wasserstein, and I'm going to show you what happens when you interpolate from the green to the blue. When you interpolate it with L2, what happens is that the mass is created on the blue and destroyed on the red, but on the Wasserstein interpolation, the mass is actually moved between the distributions. So it makes more sense in a way. It's a better way to measure similarity between those distributions. And another very important aspect is that you define the geometry of the space. You give it, the C matrix, you give it to the solver. And so, for instance, you can say, oh, this is a wall. I forbid you to go from here to here. It costs too much to go from here to here, but you can go the other way. It's going to be long, but you can go the other way. And if you do the Wasserstein barycenter with this new geometry, this is what's going to happen. Basically, now the mass is going to find another way, a shortest path with respect to the geometry you gave to the solver. Okay? Great. So that was a short introduction to OT. Keep in mind, you have the OT plan that tells you where the mass goes, and so where the point goes, and you have the value, the Wasserstein distance, that gives you a way to measure similarity between distributions. Now, it's been used more and more in machine learning in recent years for a very good reason, is that a lot of the data that we process can be seen as distribution. Okay? Even an image, a very simple way to look at an image is to discard position of the pixels and see that as points in 3D that encode the color of the image. You can model MRIs as distribution, can model surfaces, you can model bag of words, or even full data sets. Okay? For instance, imagined data set is a very large distribution in the space of images. And so you can use OT here to measure similarity that actually encode the geometry. And so there are three ways to use OT in ML. The Wasserstein distance that you can optimize, something to measure similarity. The mapping that's going to allow you to move stuff, which Theo showed to you, for instance, if you move the points. And you can also apply OT on structured data. I'm going to give you quick examples here. And so, as I showed you from a barycenter, what's very important is actually this geometry, the fact that you can encode the geometry between your points. Okay, this you can use a distance, but here use a geodesic in the surface, or depending on what you know about the data. Great, so one simple illustration. If you look at the image on the left, you discard position of the pixel. This is the distribution of the pixels, okay? You can look at the distribution of the second image on the right. If you do OT between the two, you have a plan that tells you, oh, this pixel goes here, this point goes here. So in effect, by moving the point, you're going to change the colors of the image. Okay, so it's a very simplistic way to do that, but that's a good intuitive example to show you how you can move stuff, we can displace data in RD using optimal transport. You can go further, that instead of looking only at pixels, which is very, very simplistic, okay, a pixel is just a 3D vector, now you can look at all patches of image, and so there are methods, the method that do style transfer, actually, some of them move now patches of image. And if you represent patches of image, so using deep learning, usually, you can move between distribution and change the texture, change the styles of the image while keeping the semantic constant. And another application, as you see, you can do nice barycenters. So I showed you one in 1D, but you can do barycenters in 3D. So here it allows you to interpolate between, those shapes in 3D. So the cow, the donut, and the duck, and here you get some kind of a frog, or I don't know. And it's very interesting because it allows you to basically interpolate between surfaces. It can be really practical. So in many applications. This is just one example. Another application that Theo actually showed you, you can do optimal transport for domain adaptation. The idea is if you have a shift, you can do optimal transport between the source in red and the target in blue. You can apply the transport so that you can move your points, and then basically your new points that you've moved follow the distribution of the target. And then when you train on the target, it's going to work better. So that's one strategy, transport the data. You can also transport the labels, especially the method to work about target shift, usually focus on transporting the labels instead of the point. And so one last application that I find personally fascinating is OT between graphs. So that's something quite recent. We've seen that you can represent a graph as a distribution. And so it's a very good representation because the distribution is invariant to permutation of the points, which means that when you represent a graph as a distribution, you're invariant to permutation of the nodes, which is a very natural way to look at graphs. And so if you want to do OT on graphs, you need to move points, okay, the nodes, in fact, of your graph. So a surface can be seen as a graph. And you want to move points, this time, a slightly different optimization problem. So I don't show it to you here, but you want to preserve the relationship between the points. It's not just you want to minimize the distance moved by the points, but you want to minimize the error of pairwise relationships. So see, if 2 points are close before, they should be close after mapping. So this is a much difficult problem, and it's called the Gromov-Wasserstein version of OT, and it allows you to do some crazy stuff. For instance, here you go from this surface to this surface, and you see that the point in orange stays on the head, even if you have a very weird surface that is just barely humanoid, but it's still also the point from the feet goes to the feet, and this is totally unsupervised. Okay, the solution of OT finds that for you. And you can even map to more local representation, so for instance, from 3D surfaces to 2D images, and it still preserves relations, which is very, very impressive. And we can use it on other types of data, such as brains. Okay, on functional MRIs, you basically measure both the shape of the brain of a person and its activation. And if you do optimal transport between them, you find correspondences between two persons. Okay, so you find correspondences between the position on the brain and also the activation. Okay, and when you have this map, you have a transport plan here, you can use it to transport activation from one person to the second one, and then, for instance, predict activation of a brain. And that was a very nice application, but there are other types of application in biomedical. For instance, when measuring populations of cells, usually, measuring something on the cells can kill it, okay? If you want to measure its DNA, its gene expression, you're going to kill the cell. So the problem is that you can't measure two different modalities on one cell. So usually you have population, you measure on half the population the genes, on the other half you measure something else, but the problem is you don't know which cell corresponds to which cell. And that's a very difficult problem. And with OT, by preserving pairwise relationships, again, which is Gromov-Wasserstein, you can find correspondences between cells across two different measurements. And so this is interesting because it's finding correspondences between heterogeneous data. Okay, last one. I showed you can do barycenters, okay? You can compute averages of distribution. And so with an optimal transport distance, if you have something like 8 graphs like this, and you want to compute a barycenter, this is going to be your barycenter. And so you find that basically the barycenter will denoise for you. And also, you can select the number of nodes in a barycenter. That is, you can do graph compression, basically, by using optimal transport, because you keep the structure, but you have less nodes, in a way. Okay, so those were examples of applications of optimal transport in machine learning, data science. Now I'm going to show you how to actually use it in Python with the POT library. So the POT library, we created it with Nicolas Courty in 2017, and I've been maintaining it for now 8 years. It's been a lot of work, but we're really very proud of it because we basically provide simple solvers for the majority of optimal transport variants. I will show you some examples. We implement like more than 80 papers, and we are actually quite popular. We're very happy, for instance. So the PyPy downloads are always weird metrics, but for instance, we've been cited in more than 1,000 scientific papers, so POT is used to do scientific research, and we're very proud of that. We also released in PyPI, CondaForge, and we also have a compiled version of POT in Debian and Ubuntu, which I did not do, so I'm very grateful for the one who actually did that, if I meet him one day. Okay, so now how do you use POT? So you can do pip install POT, okay? So that's how you install it. And then if you want to use POT, you remember I told you to solve OT, you need a cost matrix, the matrix that tells you how much it costs to go from one point to another one. And you need also weights, you know, the mass on each of the points. And so that's how you use POT. So you import OT, optimal transport, and you can either compute a matrix using the dist function from POT, or you can compute it yourself. As I told you, you can put your own geometry here, okay? And then you do ot.solve, and you give the matrix. And that's it. It's going to return a result. Small comment, it's going to return actually a class that is an OT result, because there are many things of interest in OT. And at least I told you about the plan. So from this object, you can recover the plan by the result.plan, or you can recover the cost, the optimal transport value with the value. You have other stuff that you can recover from OT result, but it's more for probably more advanced users. So this is how you solve OT. You see that here it's two steps. You need to compute the distance matrices, and then you plug it. We also provide a simpler function where you just put the positions of your points here, and it's going to return basically the same thing. You just need to say how you compute the cost. So here it's Euclidean, can be square Euclidean, can be Manhattan, or it's called city block inside Pi. And so that's basically, you can put a metric here. It's going to solve optimal transport for you and return the plan and the value. Great. OT is n3 log of n. The thing is, the constant is pretty small, but the n3 is here, and you're going to pay it. And so after a few thousand, tens of thousands, it's going to be long. Okay, so if you want to find OT and solve OT in larger problem, you're going to need to find ways. And what people do is usually regularized and solve approximations, actually, of optimal transport. And if you want to regularize, you just need to add a regularization term here. So the stronger the regularization, the more you're going to spread the mass, and so the less optimal it will be. And so this uses the well-known algorithm Sinkhorn, which is very popular in the optimal transport community. And so by just adding the one parameter, now you can do regularize. And this is interesting because regularization is going to smooth the problem, which means that now both your cost and your plans are actually smooth with respect to the input, which is important if you want to compute a gradient, as I said. I'm going to come back to the gradients after. Another example, so this one is to compute a barycenter. So a barycenter, this is called free support because we actually optimize the position of the support, the position of the points. And so you have two distributions. You want to find an average distribution, so between the duck and the cross, and you find this kind of cross duck here in the middle. And so you just give the position of the point, the weights on the point, the weight of your barycenter. So if you put 0.5, it's going to be in the middle. If you put 0.1, 0.9, you're going to be closer to one of the distribution. So you need to also give it initialization, and so it's going to return this kind of solution for you. And now we're going to talk about more advanced features of POT. Something that a few years back, machine learning was definitely going toward deep learning. And so nobody cared about my NumPy solvers. And so we needed basically to extend POT and to allow basically people doing deep learning to use the solvers. So I created something I called the backend at the time. And the idea was I wanted to be independent to input. So if it rings a bell, it's for a reason, because basically I needed the array API, which I didn't have at the time. So I implemented it. So we have a function get backend return something, and then you do nx.sum instead of np.sum, you know, so it's exactly the same, just different enough so that I can use the array API nowadays. So I still need to work a little bit, of course. I'm going to converge and use the array API one day. But in the meantime, what's very powerful is that you can basically give a PyTorch array to Topot. It's going to solve it. It's going to return something that is differentiable. Okay? So depending on the solver, because the exact OT solver is on CPU. So I'm going to propagate the gradient okay, even on an array on GPU, but of course you're going to have an overhead because we need to convert and copy the data, okay? But on all the regularized solvers, the one that use reg here, everything is done on the GPU, okay? So basically, you create your variable, you say, I want a gradient, you solve the problem, you recover the value, you do backward, and it's going to populate the gradient on XS automatically for you. And so this is for standard solvers. The solve sample is the solver, but we also implemented, as of 1 week ago, the release. Now we have batch solver that allows to solve a large number of small OT problems, everything on GPU also. So it brings to a large speed up if you're interested. Okay, so now quick discussion. We have tons of other solvers for variants of OT. I'm kind of fascinated by it. So we actually implemented a lot of them, and we have many contributors too. So we have solvers that do sliced OT, like a version that is an approximation of OT that is much faster. You can project in a line, on a sphere, in a subspace. We have all the OT on graphs I talked to you about. We have solvers for that. We handle unbalanced OT and partial OT, that is when basically if you do have outliers, it's going to be a problem with OT because you need to move everyone. If you have an outlier, it's going to cost a lot. Okay, so unbalanced OT is a way to discard those outliers if they are very far away. So it's more robust OT, and we have also solvers for OT and Gaussians and Gaussian mixtures. Great. So now I'm nearly done, but I want to acknowledge all the pod contributors, so nearly 80 of them. Along the years, we have very, very nice contributions. So it was created with Nicolas Courty, you see here, but there's also people you know, Alexandre Grandfort, Thomas Moreau. I've had help from a lot of people from the community. And so my co-maintainer is Cédric Vincent Cloez, who couldn't be here today, but does also a lot of the work of maintaining pod. And we did have some funding, from ANR, CNRS. We had some engineers for a while to code some features in pod. Great, so now, quick conclusion. Pot is a good toolbox. I think a lot of people use it. I think it's now pretty stable. I'm very happy with the API I showed you with ot.solve. This is actually quite recent because it was research software, so the API was awful, let's be frank. So you still have access to the old API if you really want to play with things, but now we have these wrappers and ot.solve, which is much better. You can solve classic or more advanced OT problems. There are backends, so you can basically give any of those arrays is going to work. Let's be frank here, TensorFlow and JAX are slow in pot because I don't know why my backend compiles very badly, and so they are slow, but they do work, okay? You have many examples in the gallery. Most of the illustration I show you, I just copied them from the example gallery in the doc. And so also, depending on what you want to do, other toolbox might be better. So of course, I'm talking about the competitors. GeoMLOS is very optimized for very large problems if you want to solve anthropic OT. So just one type of problems. But it compiles everything. It runs on GPU, CPU. It's very important. It's very efficient. But we do have a wrapper in pod. So by one parameter, you can just call GeoMLOS, so that's a good part. And OTT-JAX is really concentrated on JAX. That is with specific optimization that work only on JAX. So I don't think that this one will ever be in Array API, but it's extremely efficient, like JAX can be. So, well, I'm done. If you have some questions, we can answer it.
Any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. My question is about what is the relationship between OT and theory like propensity scores and statistics, and can you use OT for also to prepare statistical surveys and match different samples and to drive conclusions?
So that's a hard question. So thank you. Now the thing is, OT can be a way to measure a shift, which Theo discussed before. Okay, so it's allow you to measure or to detect a shift. Basically, if the distance is large, it means that something happened between the two distributions. It's been used, for instance, to do two sample tests. Okay. There are other connections interesting to statistics. For instance, people have shown that solving OT allows you to do quantile regression, which is a way to encode uncertainty. It's still a quite open problem, so we submitted a paper a week ago about that. So it's still a difficult thing to solve. But so there are, of course, OT is handling distributions. Statistics is computing stuff out of distribution. So basically, there are strong connections.
Any other questions?
In the second section, you talked about transporting targets versus transporting labels. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that and when one is appropriate?
When you estimate, when you solve OT, it gives you an optimal transport plan that tells you this point goes here. So you can move the point, basically, because you know where it goes. Okay, so here you move the points. Okay? That's the first part. But in the second one, you don't move the points, but you use the OT plan to propagate the labels. Basically, instead of moving the points, you take a point in target and you look at where the mass comes from. And so if it comes from points of class 1, probably this point should be class 1. That's the intuition. So the OT plan can be used in two ways, basically, to try to learn a mapping from RD to RD to move points, or to basically do propagations of labels in a way.
We have time for a couple more questions.
Thank you for your talk. You've just mentioned what OT can be also used to prove statistical hypotheses. And for example, in A/B testing, and maybe you have some experience, do it provide more sensitivity than simple t-tests?
So where OT will work and where it's most interesting is in high-dimensional statistics. When you do t-tests, you're usually 1D. So I would say it's more interesting when you're n-dimensional. But the problem is that statistically, it converges very slowly. So it's not even a powerful test. And yet, in many applications, basically theory tells us it's going to converge slowly. But in practice, it kind of works. And I think it's like a magic, a little bit like deep learning in the solver. We have kind of bias that makes the solution not that bad, even though it shouldn't be. That's and also regularization always helps, you know, like in statistics.
One last question.
Thank you for the great talk. You've showed a lot of applications for OT. I was wondering if you're aware of any applications that have been done in finance or financial markets. I remember I seen a paper on.
There is a whole book about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of literature on that.
Alfred Galichon wrote a book about optimal transport and basically finance and modeling stuff. So yes, there are a lot of them.
Yeah, and I remember I've seen a paper applying OT to martingales. Just it's more of a remark / question, but I have to.
That's I've seen this paper. I don't understand all the subtlety, so I can't really help you there.
I share the same sentiment. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can thanks Rémi again for the talk.